Hi, Dan. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So recently concluded T20 World Cup. How did you like the World Cup? Did you give any chance to South Africa at the beginning of it?
Uh, no, I didn't. Yeah, I think they had a puncher's chance. They obviously had a fantastic bowling lineup. Maybe one of the most complete bowl. I mean, maybe the most complete bowling lineup. And they had on paper one of the most destructive, if not the most destructive, middle orders. It was just a case of could everyone play well, basically. Could they get over the line in tight games, and could they finally have a little luck on their side in a World Cup? Uh, Could some of the other big teams also underperform? And it actually kind of all went according to script. They were lucky in some tight games. They got over the line in tight games. Um, England were below par. West Indies didn't quite show up. Pakistan were dreadful. Um, Australia were also very inconsistent. And apart from India, none of the other big sides really had a great World Cup. And yeah, South Africa had some on their side, some luck on their side. So and their big players played well. Their bowling was immense. Quinton de Kock, I thought, had a pretty good tournament at the top of the order. Miller had played some important innings, and Klaasen obviously played well as well. I think it was interesting to see that. I, I might be wrong in this, but I think no South African made the official team of the tournament. Anik Nokia might have, I can't quite remember, but I think that is a testament to how there wasn't one person who carried the side. Everyone played well as a collective, and I thought they were brilliantly captained by Aiden Markram. I think he had a fantastic tournament skippering the side. So yeah, I think South Africa sort of defied expectations. Why the loss against India in the final hurt so much is because they obviously came so close. But the fact that they came so close to winning it, I think, is a testament to how well they performed. So, yeah, to answer your initial question, did I enjoy the World Cup? I thought it was arguably one of the best World Cups. Forgetting South Africa's performance, just as a cricket fan, I thought it was one of the best World Cups ever. Fantastic seeing, Nepal almost beat South Africa, the USA beat Pakistan, Afghanistan getting to the semi-final. What a story. So yeah, really close games, some horrible pitches, which always makes for interesting cricket, I think. So yeah, overall brilliant World Cup, but yet more heartache for the South Africans.
Yeah, I think a lot of people expected 200, 250 kind of wickets that we saw in the IPL. But it was very interesting to see how there was a contest between the bat and the ball. You wrote a very interesting piece right after the World Cup about the Sydney rain in 92, Donald's run out in 99, Sean Pollock getting the math wrong in 2003, and Grant Elliott's masterclass in 2015. They were so close. I mean, nobody gave India a chance in the last, I don't know, till the final four overs. As a cricket fan, where do you think they went wrong?
Where do I think South Africa went wrong?
Right.
I think in that piece that you're alluding to for the Guardian, I think apart from Keshav Maharaj farming the strike at the end of one of Bumrah's overs, was it the 17th over or the 18th over, which then took David Miller off strike. I think apart from that one moment where Keshav basically tipped and ran out of sheer panic, I don't think South Africa did much wrong. I think India won this final because they've got Jasprit Bumrah, who I say in the piece is effectively a cheat code. I mean, to go at 4.5 and over in a T20. I mean, the way some Test teams bat, going at 4.5 and over in a Test match would be pretty handy. I mean, the fact that he did that in a T20 World Cup is just remarkable. One of the greatest bowlers I've ever seen. I put him on a par with Dale Steyn in the modern era of just an all-format bowler. He's got it on a string. That ball that he bowled to Reza Hendricks was genuinely one of the best balls I've ever seen in my life. I think Arshdeep bowled a fantastic over as well, and I think Pandya held his nerve. Pandya's had a really tough 18 months. He's got a lot of abuse from fans. So for him to step up in that moment, Virat Kohli finally comes right. I know people criticize him for the amount of dot balls he faced, but he had to get over the line against a good attack, and he propelled them to what would have been a record chase in a T20 World Cup final, as well as a record chase at the Kensington Oval. So I don't know. I don't know if South Africa lost that game. Yes, people will say, okay, Quinton de Kock shouldn't have picked out the fielder, should have been more aware that the fielder was put in place. But he hits that ball 8 times out of 10 for six. That's his shot. Marco Jansen didn't have a great opening over, but on another day, he drags his length back and puts one through the gates of the right-hander. Yeah, he was probably batting one position too high, Marco Jansen, that is, but South Africa's bowlers had got them into a position to win a World Cup final. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, class and edges, but I actually give credit to Hardik for disguising a slower ball and dragging him wider. That's not really how Klaasen wants to play. And Miller hits a low full toss that he normally hits for six, but he's caught on the boundary by an all-time catch. So, it's easy to paint a bullseye around an already shot arrow and say, well, South Africa lost this one. But I think that does a disservice to how well India played in those clutch moments.
Yeah, I think having seen Keshav Maharaj bat in that 1.5 overs, I thought he was just very different. Keshav Maharaj can bat better than that. But anyway, what a remarkable final. Dan, so you are a freelance journalist in the UK, but grew up in South Africa. Yes. You moved to the UK after your undergraduate college. Paint us a picture about how it was growing up in South Africa around the early 90s and why the move to England.
Well, I actually moved to England when I was 30. So I had already got my undergrad degree. I'd already got my postgraduate degree in South Africa. I was already working as a journalist for 5-6 years in South Africa. So I came to the UK. I married a Brit is sort of the short answer. We met in South Africa, and we were living there for a while. And she got the opportunity to come and work, and I was keen to explore job opportunities, and then I came and studied here. But yeah, that's just by the by. Growing up in South Africa in the 90s, I mean, it was great. I had a great childhood. I was sports mad, and like most passionate sports fans around my age in South Africa, the national teams were effectively a symbol of South Africa. As national sports teams are around the world, but because South Africa had just emerged from the wreckage of apartheid, and we were still sort of tiptoeing our way into a post-racial democracy that hasn't fulfilled its potential, if I can, which is probably a polite way of saying that things are a mess for a large part of the population, and a lot of things don't work in South Africa. But in those early years, the Springboks won the 1995 Rugby World Cup. Bafana, the national soccer team, won the 1996 African Cup of Nations at the 96 Olympic Games. There was gold in swimming and marathon. Ernie Els was a very successful golfer. Baby Jakes Matlala was a world boxing champion. So the sports teams were a success, and in my developing brain, and as I was sort of forming my worldview, I attached the sporting success of our athletes to the miracle of Nelson Mandela's democracy, and the fact that the country had averted civil war. But because cricket was my first love, I've loved the sport ever since I was 6 years old, and the first time I ever faced a hard ball in a match, it broke my nose. But also the first 2 balls I ever bowled were both wickets. So I was on a hat trick to start, and the first ball I ever faced broke my nose, and that really taught me the highs and lows of cricket, and how in the same game you can be a hero and you can be made to look like a fool. And I've just played 2 games this week, and it's a real reminder that no one wins in cricket. Eventually, like, cricket will get you, and the Proteas taught me that early on. I was a little too young to remember 1992 in the rain, although that was sort of this um, the specter that kind of hung over my early years, my early relationship with cricket. My very first memory of the Proteas was, cool. I want to get the year right. They went on a tour to Australia, and I remember Fani de Villiers getting a bowling a match winning spell in Sydney, and I just thought this is amazing. I didn't know what it was. I was up early because my folks were up early, so it was like 3 in the
Hansi
morning.
Cronje got 100 in the game, I think.
Is that right? Okay, yeah, you'll have to
I think so.
you'll have to correct me. And yeah, it was just incredible. And then I remember the 1996 World Cup. We mentioned Brian Lara, but those kits were incredible. And yes, South Africa got knocked out, but then I saw what it meant to Sri Lanka and their country who had just come through, a lot of social and political turmoil, and what it meant to Sri Lanka. And I just thought, we'll get that. I saw what football had done in South Africa. I saw what rugby had done for South Africa, and cricket was my love. And I was like, one day soon, we'll get that with cricket. And then 99 came, and I thought, hey, Lance Klusener, Hansi, Alan Donald, John T. Rhodes, Herschel Gibbs, Jacques Kallis, these, like, how could this team lose? And I remember watching, I was in primary school, and I was doing my homework as Lance Klusener was hitting Gillespie and the Australians to all corners of Edgbaston. And my mom came into the room and she said, put down your homework. We're going to the World Cup final. Her and my dad were pouring drinks. They were calling their friends over. We were going to have a big party that night. And then Lance Klusener hits the ball and Anadol drops his bat, and there's a run out and the game ends in a tie and South Africa are knocked out. And my mom called all her mates and told them not to come, and she scarred them and she said, you better finish your homework. And I was like, once again, a reminder that the game can give you so much, but it can take it away so quickly. And we're still waiting for that unifying results that can bring the country together, thanks to our cricketers. The Springbok rugby team has won the World Cup another 3 times since, we've had great success in other spheres. We've now got Trevor Noah, Tyler's wins Grammys, Charlize Theron. We got the Kruger Park, and we got Table Mountain, and our food is amazing, and the people are friendly. I'm not a fan of Elon Musk, but some people are, and they can at least point to him and say, well, he's a great businessman. But the one thing we don't have is a Cricket World Cup, and I will feel incomplete until we get that.
Yeah. I was waiting for Elon Musk. I'm like, how can you miss that name? But your point about, your first cricket match and the first 2 wickets of your 2 balls, it's a very cliche line that Indian commentators, especially, they say that cricket is the real winner.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, I'm every time I play it, I'm just like, even if I'm just like having a hit with my mate in the nets, I'm just reminded how hard it is. It's almost it's one of those sports that I think, you think of an opening batter, you average 40. If a batter, if you're an opening batter and you finish with a career average of 40, you've had a pretty good career. But if you make 40, that's not, you haven't succeeded. So just by that, you haven't gone on, you haven't kicked on, you haven't even got to a half century to raise your bat. If you score 40 every single game, that's not good enough. So if you're averaging 40, it means that on average you're failing more often than you're not. That, like, this is why getting to 100 is so special. This is why that pursuit of Temba Bavuma, the pursuit of his second Test century was so important for the country, because we just needed this guy to do well. But failure is so perfectly. I mean, it's such a British sport, isn't it? Where the British, the masters of self-deprecation, and you can't stand out, and the highest daisy is the first to get cut down. It's a sport that I think is a constant reminder of the fragility of I mean, not to be too verbose and grandiose about the sport, but it kind of does remind you of, like, the fragility of things. And but at least Indians have a World Cup. At least Australians have World Cups. Everyone else has got a World Cup. except South Africa. With respect to Bangladesh, I know Bangladesh don't have one either, but South Africa has been at this a lot longer. And again, with respect, South Africa is they just are a better team than Bangladesh. You would have expected them to win a World Cup. It's almost like how the Dutch haven't won a football World Cup, or how the French haven't won a rugby World Cup. There are just these little anomalies, and you just think, oh, how has it not happened? But I'm convinced that after seeing this team play, that look, I think England and Australia will be better at the next World Cup, and I include the 50 over World Cup in South Africa, but I think this group definitely has the potential to come right, and I think them making the final, even though they lost in such heartbreaking circumstances, I think making that final and getting that monkey off their back will stand them in good stead.
Yeah, it's all about having been there, done that. And I think that works a lot in favor of Australia. And
Sure.
I remember the press conference with Rohit Sharma in the recent World Cup. What do you think was the greatest takeaway from this innings? And he said, Australia is not in the World Cup anymore. So, yeah, I mean, off to greater heights, South Africa, because getting to the final is a big deal. So I just want to touch a little bit about politics in South Africa, and we'll get back to sport. You mentioned to me that you moved to England only when you were 30. I've been following this YouTuber called Serpenza, who is a South African living in China, and he talks about the situation in South Africa, things like reverse racism after ANC has been back in power, prolonged load shedding, and fairly recently there was a news that South Africa had experienced 48 days without power cuts, the longest period in 2 years, and they say that it's all politics, how the elections are close, and so on. Pre 1994 and post 1994, how did you see the shift in power and the entire dynamics change in the country?
Sure. Okay. I was 4 years old in 1994. I beg pardon, I was 6 years old in 1994. So I don't really have much of a memory of what life was like before then. But the apartheid system was one of the great crimes against humanity. It was orchestrated by a fascist government that destroyed countless lives, and brainwashed brainwashed white people into believing that their countrymen were subhuman, were beneath them, were inherently evil. So it's to emerge from that, with all the inequities that it propagated, was always going to take time. I mean, I don't absolve the ruling government of much, but the rolling blackouts, colloquially called load shedding, that they are culpable for that. But the truth is, and again, I'm not defending them, but the truth is that they have brought electricity to people who, under the apartheid government, didn't have electricity. They've housed people that were homeless. They've had to invest money into schools that didn't have it, into a whole infrastructure that So you'll often hear white people say that, oh well, things worked during apartheid. Yes, they worked during apartheid, but they only worked for 15% of the population. So if you're taking all the state's resources and you're making sure that that only goes to 15% of the population, well then, yeah, it's of course things are going to work, especially when those resources are procured through gold and copper and diamond mines. When those resources are being extracted from the back of basically indentured labor, black people who are getting paid peanuts to go underground in dangerous conditions to extract gold to make white people billionaires, and the government very wealthy. I mean, South Africa's a rich country, and was was then and remains a wealthy country. But the problem has always been about the distribution of that wealth. And I'm not a Stalinist. I don't believe that we should expropriate land without compensation. I think people that have things shouldn't have them. But the distribution of wealth has always been South Africa's major problem. And what is happening? So what I don't know that person that you mentioned who you follow on Instagram or whatever. But I would challenge the reverse racism line in that what he might be referring to is a political shift, you know, an economic shift. So black economic empowerment is basically a kind of catch-all to make sure that businesses have black CEOs, that a black middle class emerges, that if two candidates are applying for the same job and that with all things being equal, and one person is black and one person is white, that the black person gets that job. Now, I used to rail against this. I'll be honest, because, you know, I'm a white person and I want what's owed to me, as it were. You know, I'm not responsible for apartheid, but I recognize that South Africa's problems won't go away until we have a strong representative middle class that, you know, so I don't have the exact figures off the top of my head, but 8% of the population is white today. And the overwhelming majority of the wealth is concentrated and land is concentrated in the hands of that 8%. Now that's not good for the country. So what has been done over the last 30 years is to try and rebalance the scales. Unfortunately, what has also happened is that the ANC has siphoned money to enrich themselves. So the ANC has failed to deliver on their mandates to balance the scales. So that has happened organically. You know, top schools now that produce our cricketers, like, for example, Kagiso Rabada went to St. Stithians College, one of the elite schools in the country. He's black, obviously. Themba Bavuma was born into poverty in Langa, but then was then offered a scholarship to go to where did he go? St. David's in Johannesburg, one of the top schools in the country. So the schools are becoming more representative. Businesses are becoming more representative, but because of the ANC's corruption and greed and looting, frankly, of state resources, that organic transformation has happened much slower. And so it has given rise to mistrust in government and anger and resentment across racial lines. So things are objectively better for more people in South Africa today than they were in the 80s and the early 90s before Mandela came out of prison. But because that organic transformation has happened far too slowly as a consequence of state corruption, that's where that animosity comes from.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, you know, your talk about the 15% South Africans being the wealthy ones, and that conversation just gave me a bit of a deja vu, because I was driving with two other folks, and one of them had been to South Africa and the other person had moved to England, pretty much like yourself, after high school in South Africa, if I'm not wrong. And they were one of them was talking about how they visited Cape Town and Pretoria and how it was, you know, just like the West. It was so clean, it was wealthy and so on. And the South African born person was telling him the exact same thing that you mentioned, is if you take all the wealth and distribute it among the 10%, and if you visit that 10% of the population, obviously it's going to be good. So if you fly to Cape Town, you'll land at the airport and you'll likely stay in the city bowl around the mountain where it's, have you been to Cape Town? I have not, but I've seen, pictures.
So I mean, it's, Cape Town's gorgeous. There's the waterfront there, the beaches, the mountain, it's stunning. But if you land at the airport, you have to drive through poverty, basically. And you're Indian, so you get a sense of that juxtaposition of extreme wealth and extreme poverty. But it's inexcusable in rich countries like, same as India. There's a lot of money in India, there's a lot of money in Brazil. And yet these core members of the BRICS alliance have made people very wealthy while ignoring the fact that millions and who knows how many people go to bed hungry at night, and not millions of people go to bed hungry at night, but maybe, I don't know. I mean, the poverty is extreme. You see people begging, and in South Africa there's a lot of violent crime, and that violent crime is a consequence of the inequality. You know, because if I was a young black person in South Africa, or non-white person, let's say, in South Africa, and my parents lived in a tin shack, grew up in a tin shack under apartheid, and 30 years later, I was also living in a tin shack, I would be angry. I would be angry at the government. I'd be angry at people who had money, and you know, it's such a desperate situation for so many people. So I'm not saying I'm not justifying crime, but if we want to understand what's doesn't work in the country, we have to look at that inequality. I mean, it all comes down to inequality.
Yeah, perfectly summed up. So I grew up in India, and in the 90s, we absolutely, I mean, we still love South African cricket team, but the 90s team was something else. You know, I believe that maybe other than Australia, it was probably the most consistently dominant team through the 90s with players like Callis, Cronje. I think Cronje was leading the team amazingly well.
Yeah.
And something happened in 2000, and you wrote a beautiful piece for the Cricket Monthly in 2018, and I just want to quote it a little bit. In 2000, it reads, quote, "In 2000, a year after the anguish of that tight test match in Edgbaston, the details of the Hansie Cronje's unfortunate love for money were revealed at the King Commission hearings." And then you go on to say how, unlike the South Africa's handling of the Cronje fiasco, the Australian board had swept the matter under the carpet by privately fining the players. I had idolized Cronje and was forced to face the hard truth that even my heroes could be corrupted. The counterparts across the Indian Ocean were spared this moral lesson. It's a beautiful piece. Recommend that people read it, anyone who loves cricket and loves that South African team. But, you know, looking back at the match fixing scandal of 2000, I know you might be pretty young then. Was that handled differently, and what went wrong in handling of that fiasco?
What went wrong? I mean, I think the country was so let down by Hansie. You know, Hansie Cronje wasn't just a cricket captain. He was one of the powerful symbols of a post-racial country. There were photos of him. You know, he was a good-looking guy. He was a great player. He was a conservative, religious Afrikaans guy who was handpicked by Mandela not to be captain, but Nelson Mandela recognized his ability to unite people and to become a symbol of a post-racialized team. So, you know, there's photos of him smiling next to Nelson Mandela, and that becomes like an indelible image for a lot of South Africans, certainly in my young mind. You know, when I thought of Cronje, I also thought of Mandela. When you think of Mandela, you think of the great unity and the hope of South Africa. So Cronje became the symbol. He was the embodiment of something special about our country. And that country was supposed to be virtuous and pure and free from the sins of the past. So when it emerged that Hansie had done this, and also he had denied for so long that he had done it. So when it was almost like the Lance Armstrong thing: deny. Oh, actually, you've caught me. Yes, I did do it. And then he blamed the devil for it. So he didn't really, you know, he took responsibility, but he sort of like said he blamed the devil, which was kind of like a weak, you know, what was that about? And I think they wanted to make an example of him. I think people were angry, like not just let down and sad, like they were angry. And I think that anger informed the way he was treated. I mean, he was banned from, again, I stand to be corrected. Like you say, I was young, so I wasn't reporting on this at the time. But I think he was like banned from even like attending a high school cricket match. Like he couldn't be anywhere near cricket. He couldn't be anywhere near cricket, and it broke him. And then he died, what was it, a year or two later in a plane crash. And there was just this great sense of sadness. And I think, obviously, that he was let down, but I think sadness that he wasn't able to kind of have this redemptive arc. You know, say he was alive today and he was banned from cricket, but maybe then after 6 years, people like when when everyone's blood cools a little bit, and say, okay, fine, we'll rescind that ban. Maybe then he opens up a cricket foundation for underprivileged kids, and Hansi Cronje comes back, and then he writes a book, and then he goes on speaking tours, and then he's allowed to kind of like be this guy who made a mistake, who was corrupted by money, let he without sin cast the first stone, as it were. There was a lot of money at the time. There wasn't the IPL money. Cricketers weren't the millionaires they are today. So, maybe he could have had that redemptive arc, and maybe we could have forgiven him, and it could have been this public display of love. And you were a brilliant captain and a great player. You did this thing wrong, but we forgive you. And the fact that he didn't get that, I think, is sad, obviously, for him and his family. I mean, he not that he knows, but it's also sad for us as cricket fans. Like, I would have loved to have seen like Hansi 2.0, and now that I'm a journalist, like maybe I could have interviewed him. And I've actually interviewed every single person on that '99 Cricket World Cup squad, except for Hansi. And obviously I never will. So yeah, it's I think when I think of Hansi Cronje, and I think of that story, it's one of kind of sadness and regrets, and what could have been if he was still alive.
Was he the one person you really looked up to while growing up and following cricket? Or
he was the first player that I like as a young boy Fani de Villiers, because of that spell, and like he was probably the first cricketer I could have named. When I was younger, I wanted to be Jacques Kallis. I didn't want to be like him. I wanted to be him. I had a picture of him up on my wall. Whenever I played a cover drive in a game, I would like kind of tell myself just like Jacques, and also like I bowl. I'm not a good cricketer, and never have been, but yeah. So I love Jacques Kallis. I love John T. Rhodes because of his fielding. Alan Donald was incredible. The whole team was amazing. Sean Pollock, Lance Klusener. I've got a signed Lance Klusener shirt. But Hansi was the dad. He was the father of South African cricket. It was Bob Woolmer's team. Bob Woolmer was the coach, but it was Hansi's team. And I just said I wanted to be like Jacques Kallis. In my young mind, I could picture myself like when I was pretending shadow batting in my bedroom just before bedtime. I could envisage myself being every single other cricketer, kind of except for Hansi, because I think Hansi was on this level where we don't deify our cricketers the way Indians do. We sort of reserve that for rugby players in South Africa. But I think Hansi had this saintly aura about him, where he was, if not a god, something of like an angel almost. And yeah, that's why there was so much heartache when he did what he did. But yeah, I haven't thought about Hansi for a while. So just you got me thinking. My mom loved him. I think she found him like really sexy, and like would always come watch whenever he would bat. So I saw him as this like incredible figure. And yeah, I hope young cricket fans, like South African cricket fans coming into this, like don't just read about the corruption. I hope that they are that through their own research and their own like journey into cricket, I hope they are able to find what he meant to South Africans at the time.
Yeah. Talking about the godly figure, or like a level up, I felt the same with, people like Clive Lloyd, Imran Khan, and Hansi Cronje. Can't think, maybe Steve Waugh for a little bit. But, you look at a team, and then you look at the personality of the players and the aura that they have, and you can always say that this person has to be the captain. They had that so obvious in them, these 3-4 players. You touched upon rugby a little bit, and I wanted to ask you, because you follow both sports quite closely, what do the Springboks do right that the cricket board doesn't, or is it just the quality of talent in both the teams?
That's the $1 million question. I recently interviewed Enoch Nkwe, director of cricket for Cricket South Africa, and he said that the Springboks make his life difficult because they win so much. It's definitely not talent. I mean, we've just listed the names, but you want to, the 2011, 2015 sides under Graham Smith had AB de Villiers, maybe the best batter I've ever seen live. Dale Steyn, maybe the best bowler I've ever seen. They had Hashim Amla. Jacques Cullis was still playing. They had Morne Morkel. I'm forgetting a host of players. Faf du Plessis was coming through. So that team was good. In fact, that 2011 team was probably the best team. Was better than the 99 team. It's better than this team now. That's the team that went to number one in the world twice in the Test arena.
They were also consistently traveling well. They would win in South Australia. Yeah,
they won three series in a row in Australia. They went to India and I think became like the only side that didn't lose in India. They drew a series there. When Dale Steyn got that 7-for in Nagpur, maybe the best bowling performance by a seamer in
spell.
India.
AB de Villiers got a double 100 in Ahmedabad.
Yeah. So fantastic players, people who were the main players in the IPL side. Like I say, it is the million. It's the $1 billion question. Who knows? The Springboks have won the Rugby World Cup last year, and they won the quarterfinal, semi-final, and the final by a single point. So when you win 3 games in a row by a single point to win a World Cup, you got to wonder, like, what is it about that team? What do they have that compels them to win those tight games? And conversely, what is it about South Africa that means that they can't get over the line? I mean, yeah, they swept aside Afghanistan, but again, when it really mattered, they couldn't win. I don't know. I do believe in the theory of institutional memory, that you can inherit, and I believe in like inherited trauma on a family level. I've written about generational trauma before, as comes to Holocaust and apartheid and genocide and all the rest. This is obviously outside of sport, but I think sports institutions can inherit some sort of. Why does Real Madrid win so many titles? Is it just a case of them having the best players? Maybe, but other teams have good players too. Why do they always win? Why does Australian cricket? I know they didn't win now, but why does Australia always seem to win World Cups? Maybe there's something kind of woven into the fabric of players who go through age group systems. Maybe a young Australian can look at the 15-year-old Australian cricketer playing club cricket, can just feel in their bones that because the Australians always get over the line, that they will always get over the line. Maybe when David Miller and Quinton de Kock and Kagiso Rabada were kids, and they watched Alan Donald drop his bat and Sean Pollock forget how to count, and Faf run AB out, and Grant Elliott hit those sixes after Behardine sort of made a mess of a catch. You watch all these things, and maybe without even knowing it, you sort of assimilate these lessons that no matter how talented you are, no matter how hard you try, there's something that blocks you. I mean, imagine it didn't rain in 1992, or there was different rules for the semi-final against England, and then South Africa go and play Pakistan. Was it in the final?
Yeah.
And they beat Pakistan. I mean, obviously Imran Khan's side was very good, and there was no guarantee that they would have beaten it. But say South Africa's first World Cup, off like the Springboks, the first time they welcome back into the fold, they go and they win a World Cup. That changes everything, right? Because now you're standing on a foundation of success. It changes everything, and who knows how many World Cups they would have won. Maybe that would have been the only one, or maybe they become dominant. Australia hadn't won anything for a long time, but then Alan Donald drops his bat, and then Australia go and win a World Cup, and then they go and win the next 3. That's the African side was better than the Australian side, I would argue. Maybe South Africa win that, and then they go and create a dynasty. These are the what ifs of cricketing history. The answer is I don't know. I don't know what it is. I also want to say that the Springboks have had luck. They've also got a great scrum. They've also got a deep talent pool, deeper than any other. South African rugby is much like Indian cricket. Like South Africa's B team would probably make a semi-final of a World Cup, like kind of like New Zealand was. Maybe I think so. Right now, South Africa's talent pool is outrageous. Yeah, it's not a very satisfactory answer, but the truth is, I don't know. I wish I did know. If I did know, I would get on the first plane back to South Africa, and I would tell Enoch Nkwe, and I would be hired as a consultant.
No, I was just curious to see if there are more kids leaning towards rugby versus cricket.
I mean, it's very seasonal. So you'll have cricket's the summer sports. Rugby's the winter sport. Although football by player numbers, soccer is the most popular sport. Overwhelmingly the most popular sport. South Africa's just not as good at soccer as it is in the other two sports, and obviously soccer is more competitive around the world, so winning a World Cup is a lot harder. But I don't know who plays. I would say that there's probably more people playing recreational cricket than rugby, but that's only because the barrier to participation in rugby, unless you're big and strong, rugby's quite a tough sport to play. Unless you're strong, you don't have to be big necessarily. Although obviously cricket's got its economic factors, so I'd say they're about even in terms of player numbers. But I stand to be corrected. I might be wildly off the mark.
So a lot of people moved to England with Kolpak deal. I know it doesn't exist anymore thanks to Brexit. How are Kolpak players looked at once they return to South Africa? And I feel like in probably early 2000s or mid 2000s, South Africa did lose a lot of really, really good players to Kolpak deal. Some of the names, Kyle Abbott, I think, or Sean Abbott. I always get confused. Kyle Abbott, yeah. He bowled a remarkable spell in that test match in Hobart. And then the next thing I know is he's moving to England. Was that detrimental? Because it's remarkable to see even after Kolpak deal and people not wanting to sign contracts, etc., South Africa still has such a fantastic team.
Yeah, the Kolpaks were tough pills to swallow at the time when they first started happening, and this was before I was writing on cricket, and I was still young and passionate, more passionate and more patriotic. Like I probably I don't think I ever tweeted it or said this publicly, but I would have said to my mates, "Oh, these people are traitors. How dare they turn their back on South Africa, especially guys who had already played for South Africa." And I know, when I did write these pieces later, I know that people within Cricket South Africa, like administrators and high performance coaches, etc., felt like these guys were using Cricket South Africa as a stepping stone, basically, because you have to be a Kolpak, you had to have played a certain number of international matches, or at least be capped. My personal opinion has shifted somewhat. I mean, I'd be a hypocrite if I thought that someone didn't have the right to leave South Africa and take the skills that they developed in their in the country to make a career in the UK. I'm literally doing that. So I wrote a piece. I actually wrote a piece about Kolpaks. I've written quite a lot about Kolpaks. I wrote something for the Wisden Almanac, basically for every single cricket website. The 1999 semi-final and Kolpaks are sort of the two cricket narratives that I've written to death.
The one that I'm referring to is The Life of a Kolpak or something.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. Yeah, for Cricket Monthly. Yeah, I mean, you also have to feel for them. That side, when the Kolpaks were happening, like Kyle Abbott, you mentioned Kyle Abbott, brilliant player, but he was only playing in that series because there were injuries. I think Steyn was out injured. If everyone was fit, that the seam attack of Steyn, Morkel, Philander, was Culler still knocking about then? I can't remember. But those were the three frontline bowlers. Rabada was sort of coming through at that stage, so and he was going. It was very clear from the get go that he was going to be a generational talent. So I think Kyle Abbott, Dwan Olivier, these guys looked at it and thought, I'm not going to get in the side. And someone like Simon Harmer also, saw a lack of opportunities, and Simon blamed selection targets, quoted the quota system, racially, selections based on race. And although, my woke lefty outlook might say, oh, he's wrong or narrow-minded, or doesn't he get the bigger picture? He does have a legitimate point. At the time there were strict selection targets based on race, and that meant there were only so many places for white people in the side. And when some of those white people are Dale Steyn, AB de Villiers, Dean Elgar, who was obviously a rock at the top of the order, Faf du Plessis, Morne Morkel, whatever the case, all these guys, when they are so elite, maybe this South African infrastructure looks at Simon Harmer and say, you're good, but we've got not bad spinners who can fill one of those slots. And Kesha Maharaj has become South Africa's greatest, in my opinion, greatest ever spinner. So I have sympathy for the guys. I've got to know a few of them, and I've interviewed them. None of them wanted to, when they all, to a man, every single one of them who joined who became a Kolpak grew up wanting to play for the Proteas. That was their ambition, and they all say that playing for their country was the pinnacle of their career. All of them said, and Simon Harmer has been lucky enough to be welcomed back into the fold. So it's a strange little quirk that existed for a brief period of time in cricketing history, and a few of these guys, are kind of part of this select group, and they've contributed immensely to English cricket, to the county system. They all raised the standards. There's not a single person. I mean, there was no obligation for counties to select them. They all raised the standard. There was some animosity directed towards them from some county fans and certainly county players who were edged out, thinking, well, this guy's just driven through a loophole. Why am I not playing? He's not English, he's South African, but he's occupying as a local. And I think now that it's over, I think that they are looked on more favorably, and with a little bit more empathy than they were when they were leaving, because the one negative that they impacted in South African cricket was that them leaving might not have hurt the test team, but it definitely hurt the domestic teams that they left, because now suddenly the Knights or the Dolphins or the Lions didn't have the services of a guy who was on the fringe of the national side. And not only did the team suffer, but then the players around them suffer, because if you're a young spinner with the Warriors down in the Eastern Cape, say, and you could spend 8 years learning your craft under Simon Harmer, you're going to be a much better player for it. But now without Simon Harmer, now suddenly you're the senior player and you're getting carted all around, and guys are knocking you for six everywhere. Well, that impacts your development. So I think if there is one legitimate level of criticism against the Kolpaks, is that their exodus delayed the progress and the developments and lowered the quality of the domestic product in South Africa. And I think actually we are seeing that now. Look at the test team, which is struggling. I think the Kolpak exodus is partly to blame for that.
Excellent point. I just want to move to Supersport and the sandpaper gate. So it completely changed the face of Test cricket, especially for Australia. But when the Indian side visited, I think it was the Cape Town Test match, there was a DRS decision of Dean Elgar, and then the team just went around the stump mics, and KL Rahul was quoted saying, "It's the whole country against 11 guys," and Ravichandran Ashwin made a frontal attack saying, "You should find better ways to win Supersport."
Yeah.
So these kind of statements, I feel like stemmed from how the Australian players were targeted by SuperSport, and they were like, "Oh, hey, something's gonna come around for us." Do you think media, or do you think the broadcaster plays a role in DRS, or how what all is being focused on?
I mean, I think the home broadcasters and the home boards of any test of any event is it plays a role. I mean, was at a rugby match in 2022, France, South Africa, and there was a um, South Africa were on the line and they were going for a try that would have won the game, and it looked like they may have got over the line, and but then the replay just wasn't shown, and so the referee Wayne Barnes on the field like I don't have anything to go on, and it's like, oh, that's quite handy that the footage cut out. French TV directors, I wonder why that happened. Must have just been lucky. So yeah, I think of course that it makes a difference. I mean, you talk about the sandpaper gate. That was a direct consequence of the SuperSport guys instructed that something may have been happened to look out for it. If this was happening in Australia, the TV cameras probably wouldn't have picked it up. So yeah, I mean, I don't think I think it probably happens in India, in Pakistan. It happens in the West. Maybe it happens in the West Indies. I reckon it happens everywhere. So as long as it's not like blatant cheating, if someone's dropped a catch and you can't find the footage, well, that's cheating. And if it's like a clearly obvious snick, but then the snicko like miraculously doesn't pick it up, that's blatant cheating. But I think I can't fully remember this incident that you alluded to, Cape Town, but I remember the furore around the incident. But at the time, I kind of felt like there was a point to be made, but I don't think it fully changed the outcome of the game. Who won the match? Was that the one that South Africa won?
South Africa won the match. Yeah, I don't remember exactly the match, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But there's that famous image of Kohli kind of leaning in and shouting into the stump mic, which made a lot of South Africans quite happy because they found that quite funny. I mean, I interviewed Dean Elgar recently, and he said that he loved playing against the Indians, and that he saw Virat Kohli as a great rival, and growing up, I never even when you had when India had that fantastic batting order of Tendulkar and Dravid and Laxman and Sehwag and I'm probably forgetting four or five. Ganguly, such an all-time batting list. And you obviously had Kumble, great Harbhajan Singh, great spinners. Because the seam attack wasn't elite, even though there were some very good seam bowlers. Zaire Khan had Graham Smith's numbers certainly. But because they didn't have that great seam attack, and because there was a perception that India were kind of like too nice, and I wonder if it's because of the Indian culture, the fact that the country has internalized the post-colonial landscape in a different way to South Africans, who are a bit more like and Australians. South Africans and Australians are like chest out, thump on chest, macho kind of cultures who've always been like that. It's been great seeing the Indians adopt that more muscular approach, like what Virat Kohli did to the psychology. Maybe it was Dhoni, but I think Dhoni gave Indians self-belief, and Kohli gave them self-confidence in a way. That overt macho. It's all about, like, he's got a great beard, he's got a Bollywood wife, he's got biceps. I hate the BCCI, and I hate losing to India, and I don't want India to win because they're part of the big three and blah, blah, blah. And that's my own insecurities. But I love that there's this muscular India on the cricket landscape. And yeah, I saw the scenes of their World Cup parade through the streets now. I mean, phenomenal. So good on them, and I hope that India remembers that South Africa is an important part of the cricketing ecosystem, and that we get. I mean, a two-test series is criminal. I hope South Africa can one day return and have a four-test series against India in South Africa, because now India have got the seam bowlers, they've got great batters, they back themselves around the world. I know I forgot what the original question was, but yeah, this overt India is something that I both hate, especially when the fans can get a bit over the top, but I think it's great for the sport overall. Mostly.
Yeah. My question was pretty much about how the home broadcaster gets to pick and choose the footage that is shown, and I don't know if they play a part in how the ball tracking works. I'm not too familiar with how the technology versus the broadcaster works, but yeah, this particular test match is the one that South Africa won. India had all the hopes. South Africa had to chase like 200 something, and they chased it down in with 3 wickets down. Keegan Peterson played a brilliant innings.
Yes.
Well, before we wrap up, Dan, I just want to touch the most obvious question, I guess, that you probably might be expecting, is the investment in 2020 and fielding a second string side to New Zealand. I know you briefly touched upon the fact that you would like to see a lot more test cricket. But before that, very quickly, this particular T20 World Cup squad had only one black player. And the CSA was pretty much slammed for not meeting transformational targets. What actually happened there? Do you have any insights?
Yeah, they weren't obligated to select a team based on racial lines at all for this World Cup, and that was sanctioned by Enoch Nkwe and agreed by the coaching staff. There were no selectors. There wasn't like a selection panel. It was the coach and the captain who were allowed to select whatever team he wanted. And as a consequence, they selected a team that went to the World Cup final for the first time. So I guess their decision was vindicated. It is an indictment on Cricket South Africa, but also the governments, that there aren't enough black players worthy of their place in the team. And when I say Cricket South Africa, because obviously the onus on developing talent is on the governing body, but also the government, because cricket is an expensive sport. To be a success in cricket, you need to have access to resources, access to equipment. You need to have time on your hands. You often need a parent who can drive you to and from coaching, especially if you're a batter. You need to have good nutrition from a young age. So again, the lack of a representative black middle class in South Africa, directly impacts the young cricketers that come through the system. Cricket South Africa has been a little unlucky that a lot of the black players that have come through and become professional haven't quite fulfilled their potential. I mean, there was a hope that Temba Bavuma would have been in the side, that Andile Peklokwaya, when he came through, could have, Andile Peklokwaya was touted as the next Lance Klusener, not, about 8 years ago when he burst onto the scene. I remember he almost single-handedly won an ODI series against Australia, where we thwacked sixes and took stunning catches and bowled really good death overs. He hasn't kicked on. Kaya Zondo hasn't quite fulfilled his potential. Lungisani Ngidi hasn't fulfilled his potential. When he burst on the scene against India and he got Kohli out in his debut match, we thought, here we go, Kagiso Rabada and Lungi Ngidi are going to be opening the bowling for a generation to come. What a transformed country. So Cricket South Africa have been a little unlucky in that sense, but you need a wide talent pool. It's not just black players who haven't kicked on. There are many white players that haven't kicked on, but there have been more white players to compensate for that. So Yeah, it's a conversation that won't go away. It's a conversation that mustn't go away. Um, and until South Africa has not even a fully representative team, because if that was fully represented, there'd be 8 black players in the 11. One would be either colored, mixed race or Indian, and one would be white. That would be a truly representative team of South Africa. I don't see that happening in the next 50 years. But to only have one black player in Rabada, black African in the squad, yeah, that it is a problem. And some of your listeners might think that that this is all about identity politics and I should focus on the player. Fair enough. I don't want to play in that squad who doesn't deserve to be there. But you're in India as a country that also recognizes that representation matters, and you look at a guy like Shami and people from the north and the south, and when you do get a guy from like a particular part of the caste system, which I won't even pretend to understand, but I know that it's a big deal when someone from a different level on the caste is representing India. That's important. The representation matters, and you can't be what you can't see. So if you're a young black cricketer in the country and you're looking at this World Cup and you don't see yourself represented in that team, then perhaps you won't be compelled to continue playing cricket. But if you look at the Springboks and you see Siya Kolisi, the black captain who's won 2 World Cups, you might think, okay, now here's a sport where I do feel represented, where I do feel seen. I'm going to go play. So if you're only appealing to 20% or 15% or 8% of your population, well, your talent pool is going to be even smaller. So I think for many levels, it's important. And obviously, just to kind of wrap up, I mean, maybe it's either the most important reason or the least important reason, because South Africa had come through apartheid. I think it'll just be good. It'll just feel good to see a team that does represent all the races of the country. So from practical brass tacks reasons all the way to like the cushy abstract feeling reasons, it's important that the team is better represented.
Yeah, I think what you said about India is so true, because till probably the late 90s, a majority of Indian cricketers were maybe from Bangalore or Mumbai or Delhi. And now, prominently after Dhoni, a lot of small town boys are really looking forward or have seen the probability of playing for India. Very quickly before we end, just want to touch about Zansi League versus the new 2020 League. Do you see that as a welcome sign for South African cricket, or as an old-time romantic of Test cricket, do you see that as, probably taking a step back?
I really like T20 cricket. I mean, I love Test cricket more than the other formats, and I have mourned the decline of Test cricket in South Africa as much as anyone else. But I don't see it as an either or thing. I do believe Graham Smith, who's the manager, basically the CEO of the SA20 League, I believe him when he says that it is important, the competition is important to fill the coffers of Cricket South Africa, and that short-term pain on the Test arena will be worth it down the line, because we will have money in the bank to host Test. I mean, South Africa and Ireland are playing a bilateral series later this month, but it's taking place in the UAE because Ireland can't afford to host South Africa. So, it's expensive. And until the revenue distribution model among all nations is recalibrated, it's going to remain expensive for teams when they're not playing India. So, yes, the SA20 is an economic lifeline. I think the SA20 has also been good for the white ball side. You look at a guy like Otniel Bartman, who's emerged. He was a star on the SA20. Klaasen, Miller, Markram's captaincy. Nokia, Janssen. These are guys who played well in the SA20 because of the affiliation with the IPL, obviously all the teams in the SA20 are owned by IPL franchises. It means that there's a greater shop window to get into the IPL. And then if you can get into the IPL, not only are you making bank, but you're now rubbing shoulders with the best coaches in the world, with the best players in the world. You're playing in the most intense furnace in the world. And I think it's no coincidence that South Africa has had their most successful World Cup. After 2 years of the SA20, the crowds are full, the stands are full, the public love it. It's great cricket. It's been a success. But I'll reserve judgment on what it means for South African cricket until I see a return to Test cricket, to the standing of South African Test cricket, until I see that trickle-down economics that has been promised, whereby academies are set up, where young coaches and young players from less resourced areas, like urban townships and rural parts of South Africa, unless they are brought into the fold as has been promised, I see the SA20 as something existing outside. I mean, it is outside of the auspices of Cricket South Africa, but we've been told that it'll feed Cricket South Africa. I've yet to see that. So brilliant competition for those who are playing, brilliant for their development. But is it good for the broader landscape of Cricket South Africa? The jury's still out.
Okay. Wow, Dan, what a fantastic conversation. There were so many things still needed to be doubled down, but we still got a lot covered in this 1 hour podcast. So thank you so much. Really love your articles. I've been following your work for quite some time now. Loved your episode with the great cricketer and also the Final Word cricket podcast quite recently. So thank you so much for your incredible work.
No, thank you. It's great to be on the show. Glad I could. Thanks for giving me the space to wax on about South African cricket, my favorite subject.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Bye.